I'm Lucy, 34 years old, and 3 days ago my husband Mark left me a note that simply said, "I need time to think." I assumed it was about his recent job. Stress, the late nights, the constant pressure. But as I stood in our kitchen holding his favorite coffee mug, reading those words over and over, the doorbell rang. Two police officers stood there with a woman I'd never seen before, dressed in a sharp business suit, holding a thick manila folder with my maiden name written across it. Before I continue this story, please let me know where you're watching from, hit that like button, and subscribe to hear how one simple note led to uncovering a decade of deception that would change everything I thought I knew about my life. When I think back on my 10 years with Mark, every memory feels tainted now, like looking at old photographs through broken glass. We met at a tech conference in Seattle when I was 24, full of ambition and dreams for my graphic design career. Mark was presenting on software architecture, and I remember being drawn to his confidence, the way he commanded the room's attention. During the networking break, he approached me at the coffee station, made some joke about the terrible convention center brew, and suddenly we were talking for 3 hours straight. Our courtship felt like something from a romantic movie. Weekend trips to Vancouver, where we'd explore Stanley Park and eat too much sushi. Sunday mornings cooking elaborate brunches together, him teaching me his grandmother's pancake recipe, while jazz played through our tiny apartment speakers. We trained for a marathon together, those early morning runs, where we'd plan our future between breaths. He was supportive of my career, encouraging me to leave the agency and start my own design business. When he proposed after 18 months on a hiking trail overlooking the Columbia River Gorge, I said yes without hesitation. Our wedding in Napa Valley was everything I dreamed of. 70 guests among the vineyards, my dress flowing in the September breeze, Mark tearing up as I walked down the aisle. His vows talked about building a life of honesty and partnership. The irony of those words haunts me now. We bought a fixer-upper in suburban Portland, spent weekends at Home Depot, argued playfully over paint colors. I remember the day we finished renovating the kitchen, how we slow danced on the new hardwood floors, celebrating with champagne from plastic cups, because we'd packed all the glasses. Mark's career seemed to flourish alongside our marriage. He earned promotion after promotion, eventually becoming senior developer at a prominent firm downtown. My graphic design business grew 2 landing contracts with several major Portland companies. We were the couple our friends envied, hosting dinner parties where Mark would charm everyone with his stories and perfectly mixed cocktails. Looking back, I realize how he always steered conversations away from his past, from his family, changing subjects so smoothly no one noticed. The small tensions started about a year ago, though. I see now there were signs earlier I simply chose to ignore. His work trips increased sometimes with barely any notice. He'd get phone calls that he'd take in the garage claiming they were about sensitive company projects. When I'd ask about his day, he'd give vague answers, then turn the conversation back to me. Always interested in my work, my clients, my financial decisions. I thought he was being supportive. Last month, his behavior shifted more noticeably. He started clearing his browser history obsessively, something he'd never done before. He joined a gym across town rather than the one 5 minutes from our house, claiming he liked their equipment better. He opened a separate credit card for business expenses, said it would make taxes easier. These things seemed reasonable individually, but together they created an unease I couldn't shake. The morning he left was strange from the start. He showered earlier than usual, was fully dressed before I even woke up properly. At breakfast, he wouldn't quite meet my eyes, kept checking his phone. When I asked if everything was okay, he kissed my forehead and said he was just stressed about a deadline. He left his coffee half finished, forgot his lunch in the refrigerator. An hour later, I found the note on the kitchen counter, placed precisely next to the bag of my favorite coffee blend he'd bought me the week before. I need time to think. 5 words that shattered my morning routine. No explanation, no timeline, no contact information. Just those words in his careful handwriting. I called his phone immediately, but it went straight to voicemail. Not just turned off, but completely disconnected. My text showed as undelivered. I called his office, my voice embarrassingly shaky as I asked for him. His manager seemed confused, told me Mark had requested personal leave starting that morning, hadn't said when he'd return. Those first 2 days alone were a tornado of emotions. Anger that he'd leave so cryptically. Worry that something terrible had happened to him. Confusion about what I'd done wrong. I checked our bank accounts obsessively, but nothing was missing. His clothes still hung in the closet. His toiletries still cluttered the bathroom counter. It was as if he'd simply evaporated, leaving behind only questions and that infuriating note. I called his few friends, but none had heard from him. His social media accounts showed no activity. Even his beloved gaming account sat idle. I found myself walking through our house like a detective searching for clues to explain his disappearance. That's when I discovered something that made my blood run cold. Hidden in a drawer of his home office desk beneath old tax returns was a receipt for a storage unit I knew nothing about. The unit had been rented 6 months ago, paid in cash under a name that wasn't quite his. Mark Stevens instead of Mark Coleman. Close enough to be a typo, different enough to be deliberate. The morning the police arrived, I was sitting at our kitchen table, still wearing yesterday's clothes, surrounded by papers where I'd been trying to make sense of our finances. The doorbell made me jump, coffee sloshing over the rim of my mug. Through the peephole, I saw 2 uniformed officers and a woman in a charcoal gray suit. My first thought was that something had happened to Mark, that they'd come to deliver terrible news. Officer Johnson, a tall man with kind eyes, asked if I was Lucy Coleman. When I nodded, he asked if they could come in. The woman, who introduced herself as Diana Hartley, federal investigator, held that manila folder against her chest like a shield. What struck me most was seeing my maiden name, Lucy Ann Patterson, written in bold letters across the folder's tab. I hadn't used that name in 10 years. We sat in my living room, where our wedding photos smiled down from the walls, mocking the surreal scene below. Diana placed the folder on our coffee table, the same table where Mark and I had played countless board games, shared bottles of wine, planned our future. Her fingers hesitated on the folder's edge before she opened it, and in that moment, I knew my life was about to shatter completely. The first thing she pulled out was a surveillance photo of Mark taken just 6 months ago, according to the timestamp. He was entering a bank I didn't recognize, wearing a suit I'd never seen. The next photo showed him at a restaurant sitting across from a blonde woman, their hands touching across the table. My stomach lurched, but Diana kept pulling out documents. A driver's license with Mark's photo, but the name Mark Stevens. Another with Michael Stone. A third reading Martin Sanders. My voice came out as a whisper when I insisted there must be some mistake. My husband was Mark Coleman. We'd been married for 10 years. I knew him. Diana's expression softened, but her words cut through my denial like a blade. Mark Coleman didn't exist. The identity was created 12 years ago, built carefully with forged documents and stolen social security numbers. The man I'd married, shared a bed with, planned children with, was a complete fabrication. She spread more photos across my coffee table, each one a punch to my gut. Mark with 3 different women in 3 different cities. A redhead in Chicago laughing at something he'd said. A brunette in Denver wearing an engagement ring I didn't recognize. An older woman in Philadelphia signing what looked like legal documents while Mark watched. Diana explained these were his other wives. Not ex-wives. Current wives. The word bigamy swirled in my head, too absurd to process. Diana pulled out marriage certificates, each with Mark's face but different names. Different dates overlapping with our marriage. The redhead Jennifer married 3 years ago. The brunette Angela 5 years ago. Patricia in Philadelphia 8 years ago. All of us existing simultaneously in his carefully compartmentalized life. My hands shook so violently, I dropped my coffee mug. It shattered on the hardwood floor Mark had installed last summer, coffee spreading like a dark accusation. Officer Martinez, a younger woman with a sympathetic face, went to get me water while I sat there staring at the broken ceramic pieces. Such a small thing, but it felt symbolic. Everything breaking, impossible to put back together. Diana continued talking, her voice professional, but not unkind. She'd been tracking him for 2 years, following a pattern that stretched back over a decade. He targeted specific types of women: successful independent, either with family money or thriving careers. Never violent, she assured me, as if that made it better. Just elaborate emotional and financial fraud. The mention of finances snapped me back to attention. I thought about the joint business account he'd convinced me to open last year, said it would help with taxes. The investment opportunity he'd mentioned just last week, something about a startup that needed seed money. Diana seemed to read my thoughts, asked about any recent financial changes or requests. When I told her about the account, she nodded grimly, said that was his pattern. Gain trust, gain access, gain everything. Diana explained she'd been building this case methodically, but Mark was clever, always staying just ahead of consequences. He must have sensed the investigation closing in, which is why he ran. But they needed my help to catch him, to prevent him from doing this to anyone else. The other wives were cooperating fully. Together we could stop him. I thought about the storage unit receipt told them about it. Diana's eyes lit up, the first real excitement I'd seen from her. That could be where he kept evidence from his other lives, she said. Documents, valuables, things he'd taken from other women. Officer Johnson called for a warrant while Diana asked me more questions. Did he ever talk about his childhood? Did I ever meet his family? Did he have any identifying marks or scars? The answers were all no. He'd said his parents died in a car accident when he was young. No siblings, no extended family. A childhood of foster homes he didn't like discussing. I'd found his reluctance to talk about it endearing, hadn't wanted to push him to relive trauma. Now I realized the trauma was fiction designed to prevent questions. The scar on his shoulder, he claimed, was from a bike accident. The tattoo on his hip, he said he got in college. All of it manufactured backstory for a person who never existed. Diana asked for permission to search our house, and I signed the consent form with a hand that didn't feel like mine. As they began their systematic search, I sat on the couch where Mark and I had watched countless movies, where we'd spent lazy Sunday afternoons reading, where I'd thought we were building a life together. Every memory felt poisoned now, every happy moment a lie. The woman in those surveillance photos laughing with my husband probably felt the same way I once did. Special. Loved. Chosen. We were all just roles in his elaborate performance, and none of us knew we were sharing the stage. The search of our house revealed more than I could have imagined. Diana and her team worked with methodical precision, documenting everything while I watched my life get dissected. In Mark's home office, hidden behind tax software boxes, they found a second laptop I'd never seen. When Diana powered it on, password-protected screens flashed with encryption warnings. She bagged it for their cybercrimes unit, mentioning something about financial tracking software and encrypted communications. The real shock came when we went through our financial records together. Diana had a forensic accountant on speakerphone walking us through transactions I'd never noticed. Over the past year, Mark had slowly, carefully moved $40,000 from my business account. Not in large chunks that would raise alarms, but in small transfers disguised as vendor payments. He'd created fake invoices from companies that existed only on paper. Design consultation fees to firms that had no addresses. Marketing services from agencies that had no employees. My client list had been compromised too. He'd copied everything from my computer, all their contact information, project details, payment histories. Diana explained this was likely for his next identity, possibly planning to approach them as a new design firm, using my work as portfolio pieces. The violation felt personal in a way that transcended the financial theft. He'd stolen my creativity, my professional reputation, my relationships with clients. I'd spent years cultivating. Diana revealed his real name then, or at least the earliest identity they could trace. Marcus Wright, originally from Detroit with a sealed juvenile record and his first adult conviction for fraud at 19. He'd discovered his talent for manipulation early, started with small cons, credit card fraud, identity theft. Prison time had only educated him further. He came out knowing exactly how to build false identities, that would pass background checks, how to target victims who wouldn't immediately report crimes, how to disappear when necessary. Patricia from Philadelphia was his first known marriage victim 8 years ago. Diana had spoken with her extensively. Patricia had been a widow grieving her husband's death, vulnerable and lonely. Marcus had appeared like an answer to prayers, patient and understanding, never pushing too fast. Within a year, he'd convinced her to invest her husband's life insurance payout, $200,000 in a real estate venture that never existed. When she discovered the truth, he was already gone, leaving behind only fabricated documents and a trail of digital breadcrumbs leading nowhere. Jennifer in Chicago came next, a divorced mother of 2 trying to rebuild her life. Marcus played the perfect potential stepfather, attending soccer games and school plays, helping with homework. Her children called him Uncle Mark. He systematically drained their college funds, $75,000 meant for their futures, claimed he was moving it to higher yield accounts. Jennifer didn't discover the theft until she tried to make a tuition payment and found empty accounts. She still hasn't told her children the full truth, can't bear to explain how the man they trusted stole their futures. Angela in Denver was the youngest victim at 23 when they met 5 years ago. Fresh out of college, working her first real job, excited about adult life. Her parents had warned her about the older man who seemed too good to be true, but she'd dismissed their concerns as overprotective paranoia. Marcus had destroyed her credit, opened dozens of cards in her name, took loans against her car, even tried to mortgage a property using her information. At 28, she was still recovering financially, had moved back with her parents. Lost career opportunities due to bankruptcy. Sitting there listening to these women's stories through Diana's clinical recitation, I felt a strange kinship with strangers I'd never met. We'd all fallen for the same illusion, just wearing different masks. Patricia got the grieving widower finding love again. Jennifer got the family man ready to settle down. Angela got the successful older man offering stability. I got the ambitious partner building our empire together. Same predator, different camouflage, perfectly adapted to each hunting ground. The storage unit key in Mark's toolbox led to a facility 20 minutes away. The warrant came through that afternoon, and I insisted on going with them. I needed to see what he'd hidden, needed to understand the full scope of his deception. The unit was small, climate-controlled, organized with the same precision Mark brought to everything. Boxes labeled with dates and cities. Philadelphia 08 through 11. Chicago 12 through 15. Denver 14 through 19. Portland 15 through present. Inside were artifacts of destroyed lives, women's jewelry I didn't recognize, including what looked like Patricia's wedding ring from her first marriage. Photo albums documenting relationships I knew nothing about. Legal documents, birth certificates, social security cards, some real, some forged. A box of cell phones, each presumably used for different identities. External hard drives labeled with women's names. The methodical nature of it made my skin crawl. We weren't people to him. We were projects carefully cataloged and stored. Looking at those photos was the hardest part, seeing him in the same poses with different women. The way he held Jennifer at Chicago's Navy Pier was exactly how he'd held me at Seattle's waterfront. The expression on his face as he looked at Angela mimicked perfectly the look I'd thought was reserved for me. Even our proposal photos were eerily similar. Same kneeling position, same ring box angle, same practiced surprise and joy. We were all living variations of the same script, and none of us knew we were just understudies in each other's performances. Diana's team photographed everything, building their case piece by piece. She explained the psychological profile they developed. Marcus was a narcissist with antisocial personality disorder, capable of mimicking emotions without feeling them. He studied his victims, learned what they needed, became that person. The patience required was extraordinary. Years of maintaining multiple identities, remembering different histories, keeping stories straight. It was exhausting just thinking about it, but for him, it was the game itself that provided satisfaction. The money was almost secondary to the thrill of successful deception. They found something else in that storage unit that made Diana's expression darken. A new set of documents for another identity. Roger Mitchell recently relocated from Portland to Austin. Business cards for a consulting firm. A laptop with dating profiles already created. He wasn't just running from us. He was already hunting new prey. Some woman in Texas was probably getting charming messages right now from a successful consultant looking for genuine connection. The cycle continuing, endless and destructive. Diana asked if I'd be willing to help stop him. Not just cooperate with the investigation, but actively participate in bringing him to justice. The other women had agreed, she said. We all wanted this to end, wanted to prevent the next victim, the next destroyed life. Without hesitation, I said yes. The man I'd loved never existed, but the criminal wearing his face needed to be stopped. If my pain could prevent someone else's, if my humiliation could save another woman from this nightmare, then maybe something meaningful could come from this wreckage. The plan Diana outlined required me to become someone I'd never been before. An actor in my own life, playing the role of desperate abandoned wife, while knowing the truth about my husband's deception. Marcus didn't know yet that we were onto him. He believed his exit strategy had worked, that I was sitting at home confused and waiting just as his other victims had done initially. This gave us an advantage, but only if I could convincingly play my part. Diana brought in a federal team to set up surveillance in our house. Tiny cameras hidden in smoke detectors, recording devices in phone jacks, monitoring software on all our computers. They taught me how to wear a wire, how to position my body so it would catch clear audio, how to speak naturally while knowing every word was being recorded. 2 agents would be stationed in a van outside at all times, ready to intervene if necessary. For 2 days, nothing happened. I posted on social media about missing my husband, wondering where he'd gone, hoping he was safe. Friends commented with sympathy and support, having no idea about the federal investigation surrounding their concerned words. I went to work, met with clients, maintained the facade of normalcy, while my insides churned with anticipation and dread. Every phone ring made my heart race. Every unknown number could be him. On the 3rd night, a text came through from a number I didn't recognize. The message was simple. I'm sorry. Can we talk? My hands trembled as I showed it to Diana, who was stationed in my kitchen. She nodded already on her phone with the tech team. They traced the number to a hotel 40 miles away, paid for in cash under the name Robert Stevens. Close to his fabricated identity, but different enough to avoid immediate detection. Diana coached me on how to respond. Sound vulnerable, she said. Let him think you're desperate for answers for him. I typed and deleted a dozen messages before sending one that made me feel sick. Please, I need to understand. I love you. Where are you? His response came quickly, asking if I was alone, if anyone knew he'd contacted me. I assured him it was just between us, that I hadn't told anyone, just wanted him home. When my phone rang an hour later, his name on the screen, even though it was a different number, I had to take 3 deep breaths before answering. Diana gave me a thumbs up, the recording equipment active. His voice, that same voice that had whispered goodnight to me thousands of times, now sounded different knowing what I knew. The fake emotion, the practiced concern, the calculated pauses. How had I never heard the performance before? He spun a story about family pressure, mental health struggles, needing time to figure things out. His voice broke at all the right moments. The tears I couldn't see but could hear sounded so real. He mentioned therapy medication, the shame he felt for leaving. Then, as Diana had predicted, came the ask. The therapy was expensive. He'd had some investment losses he hadn't told me about. He needed help just temporarily, just until he could get back on his feet and come home to me. I played along, letting my voice crack with emotion that was real, but not for the reasons he thought. I told him I'd do anything to help, that our marriage meant everything to me. When I asked about our savings, he claimed bad investments had drained them, that he owed money to people who wouldn't wait. $50,000, he said, from the inheritance I'd received from my grandmother last year. The inheritance I'd never told him the full amount of, yet he knew exactly how much remained. Testing Diana's theory, I mentioned seeing some strange charges, asked about names I'd found. Mark Stevens, Michael Stone. His silence lasted just a beat too long before he launched into an explanation about identity theft, about protecting me from the mess while he sorted it out. His lies flowed so smoothly, each one building on the next, creating an architecture of deception that almost made sense if you didn't know the truth. When I asked about the photos I'd found describing the surveillance images without revealing their source, I heard his anger flash through before he controlled it. The accusation in his voice as he called me paranoid. Said I was creating problems where none existed. This was why he'd left, he claimed, because I didn't trust him. The manipulation was masterful, turning my discovery of his crimes into my failure as a wife. A year ago, it would have worked. I would have apologized, begged for forgiveness. Now, knowing what I knew, I could hear the technique recognize the emotional manipulation. I pretended to break down sobbing apologies, begging him to come home. His satisfaction was audible as he shifted back to comforting mode, telling me everything would be okay if I just trusted him. He suggested meeting at the park where we used to walk, where he'd first told me he loved me. Tomorrow noon, bring the money in cash. We'd leave together, start fresh somewhere new, away from all the stress and pressure. The life we'd always dreamed of, just the two of us. After hanging up, I sat in silence while Diana and her team reviewed the recording. They had what they needed: his admission to multiple identities, the financial request, the manipulation tactics. But they wanted more. They wanted him to admit to the other marriages the full scope of his crimes. That would require meeting him in person, wearing a wire, pushing him to reveal more while maintaining my cover. The risk made my stomach turn, but the thought of him doing this to another woman made my decision clear. Diana spent the rest of the night coaching me. How to draw out confessions without seeming suspicious. Key phrases that would legally establish intent and knowledge. She connected me with the other victims via secure video call. Patricia, older and elegant, even through the computer screen, advised me not to let him see my strength. He feeds on weakness, she said, so starve him with submission until the trap springs. Jennifer, exhausted but determined, told me to remember he'd already stolen enough from all of us. Don't let him steal your courage, too. Angela was the most emotional, thanking me for being willing to do what she couldn't. She'd been too young, too scared, too alone when it happened to her. Seeing us all together, united in our determination to stop him, gave her a closure she hadn't found in therapy or time. We were strangers bound by the same wound, healing together through collective action. It was powerful and tragic and necessary all at once. The night before the meeting, I couldn't sleep. I walked through our house, seeing it differently now. The renovation choices I'd thought were mutual decisions were actually his preferences overriding mine. The art on the walls he'd selected claiming better taste. The furniture arranged for his comfort, not mine. Even our home hadn't been ours. It had been his stage, and I'd been an unwitting prop in his performance. I stood in our bedroom, looking at the wedding dress still preserved in the closet, remembering the woman who'd worn it. She'd been so certain about her future, so secure in her choices. I grieved for her innocence, her naive belief in fairy tale love. Taking off my wedding ring felt like shedding skin, painful, but necessary. I placed it in my jewelry box next to the necklace he'd given me for our 5th anniversary, the earrings from my 30th birthday. All props in his elaborate show, meaningless trinkets from a person who never existed. Diana arrived before dawn to help me prepare. The wire was thin, almost invisible against my skin. She chose my outfit, something that would hide the device while appearing vulnerable and unplanned. We rehearsed scenarios, practiced responses, prepared for contingencies. Federal agents were already in position around the park, dressed as joggers, dog walkers, maintenance workers, everyone playing their part in this final act of our twisted drama. The morning of the meeting arrived gray and drizzling, Seattle's signature melancholy weather matching my mood perfectly. I arrived at the park early, needing time to center myself before the performance. This place held so many memories. Our first kiss under the old oak tree, picnics on summer afternoons, the bench where he'd first said he loved me, words I now knew he'd probably said to dozens of women across the country. Federal agents were invisible but everywhere. the jogger stretching by the fountain, the couple having coffee at the picnic table, the maintenance worker trimming hedges with unusual focus. Diana was in a van 2 blocks away, listening to every word through the wire taped to my ribs. I sat on our usual bench, the one with a view of the lake, and waited for the stranger wearing my husband's face. I saw him before he saw me, walking with that familiar confident stride, dressed in jeans and a jacket I didn't recognize. He'd lost weight, his face more angular, shadows under his eyes suggesting sleepless nights. For a moment, just a heartbeat, I felt the old pull, the attraction that had started everything. Then I remembered Patricia's empty bank accounts, Jennifer's children's stolen futures, Angela's destroyed credit, and my anger solidified into cold determination. His face transformed when he saw me, shifting into an expression of relief and love, so convincing that even knowing the truth, part of me wanted to believe it. He approached slowly, hands visible, playing the role of contrite husband perfectly. When he reached for me, I let him pull me into an embrace, fighting not to recoil from his touch. He smelled different, wrong cologne, wrong shampoo. Even his scent had been a lie. We sat on the bench where he'd once promised to love me forever, and he began his performance. Tears appeared on cue as he talked about his struggles, the pressure he'd been under, the shame that had driven him away. He wove a tapestry of lies about childhood trauma, resurging about needing professional help he couldn't afford, about wanting to protect me from his darkness. Every word was calculated to trigger sympathy, to make me complicit in my own manipulation. When I asked why he hadn't just talked to me, he hung his head in practiced shame. He'd been raised to be strong, he said, to handle his own problems. His father had been the same way, which is why his parents' marriage had failed. He didn't want that for us, but he'd handling things so badly. The irony of him invoking his fictional dead parents to manipulate me would have been funny if it weren't so twisted. I played my part, touching his hand, telling him I understood, that I just wanted to help. When I mentioned our financial situation, asked about the money he needed, his demeanor shifted subtly. This was what he'd really come for. The story became more elaborate. Bad investments made in desperation. Debts to dangerous people who wouldn't wait. 50,000 would clear everything, let us start fresh. He had a job opportunity in Austin, away from all these problems. We could relocate, begin again, just the two of us. Taking Diana's advice, I pressed carefully about the different names I'd discovered. His jaw tightened before he forced it to relax. Identity theft, he explained. Someone had stolen his information years ago. He'd been trying to clean it up without worrying me. The Mark Stevens name was an old account from college he'd forgotten about. Michael Stone was the thief, using his social security number. Such elaborate lies, each one spawning 2 more, a fractal pattern of deception, expanding endlessly. Then I asked about the storage unit, watched his pupils dilate with surprise before he recovered. How did I know about that? He asked, his voice carrying the first hint of genuine emotion I'd heard. I told him I'd found the receipt while looking for clues about where he'd gone. His mind worked, visibly calculating what I might have found, how much I might know. The unit was for his parents' things, he said. Finally, items too painful to keep at home, but too precious to discard. I pushed harder, mentioning I'd driven by the facility, suggesting we could go there together after the bank. His whole body tensed, fight-or-flight instincts visibly engaged. That's when I made my move, pulling out my phone, showing him one of the surveillance photos Diana had shared. His face with another woman, the timestamp clearly visible. "Who is she?" I asked, letting my voice break with fabricated pain. The mask slipped for just a moment, his real face showing through. Cold calculation, assessment of threat, planning of escape. Then it reformed, smoother than before. She was a client, he said, from his consulting work. The photo was misleading, taken out of context. How did I even have such a photo? Was I having him followed? The accusations came fast, trying to regain control, make me the villain in his narrative. I mentioned the other photos, described Jennifer and Angela without naming them, watched him scramble for explanations. Business associates, cousins he'd never mentioned, friends from support groups. The lies came faster, less polished, desperation creeping into his voice. When I said the word bigamy, his face went white, then red, then settled into something dangerous. Standing abruptly, he grabbed my wrist, not hard enough to leave marks, but firm enough to establish control. "We were leaving," he said. "Now, together." I'd clearly been influenced by someone, probably my sister, who'd never liked him. We needed to get away from these toxic influences, start fresh where no one could poison me against him. The real Marcus was emerging, the one his other victims had probably glimpsed at the end. That's when I said the words Diana had given me. "I know about Patricia, about Jennifer, about Angela. I know who you really are, Marcus." His grip on my wrist tightened as his face transformed into something I'd never seen before. Pure rage, quickly followed by cold assessment. He looked around the park, probably noticing for the first time how many people seemed to be watching us. His hand released my wrist as he stepped back, preparing to run. The federal agents moved in perfect synchronization. The jogger by the fountain sprinted forward. The couple at the picnic table revealed badges. The maintenance worker dropped his trimming shears, hand moving to his weapon. Marcus tried to run, but there was nowhere to go. They tackled him on the jogging path 20 feet from our bench, handcuffs clicking into place as he struggled against them. The sound that came from him then wasn't quite human. Rage, frustration, disbelief, combining into something primal. As they pulled him to his feet, his eyes found mine, and the hatred there was pure and undiluted. He spat curses at me, called me names I'd never heard from his mouth, accused me of ruining everything. This was the real man, the one who'd been hiding behind Mark Coleman's pleasant mask for 10 years. Diana appeared, reading him his rights as she formally arrested him. The list of charges seemed endless. Wire fraud, mail fraud, identity theft, bigamy, forgery, interstate commerce violations. Each charge carried years in prison. As they led him away, he turned back once more, and his face had reformed into something pleading, one last attempt at manipulation. "Baby, please tell them this is a mistake. I love you." The performance continuing even as the curtain fell. I sat back down on the bench, legs too shaky to stand, and watched them put him in an unmarked federal vehicle. Diana sat beside me, told me I'd done perfectly, that we had everything we needed. The wire had caught his admissions, his threats, his attempt to flee. Combined with the evidence from the storage unit and the testimony of 4 wives, he wouldn't be manipulating anyone for a very long time. A week after Marcus's arrest, Diana arranged for all of his victims to meet in person. We gathered at my house, the same living room where I'd first learned the truth, but now it felt different. Reclaimed somehow. Patricia arrived first from Philadelphia, an elegant woman in her 60s with silver hair and kind eyes that held deep sadness. Jennifer drove from Chicago, looking exhausted but determined, showing me photos of her children who still asked about Uncle Mark. Angela flew in from Denver, young and fierce, carrying a notebook full of questions she'd been too afraid to ask anyone else. We sat in a circle, sharing our stories in full for the first time. Patricia spoke about her late husband, how Marcus had seemed like a miracle after 2 years of loneliness. He'd been patient, never pushing physical intimacy, building trust slowly. He'd learned everything about her husband's death, then used that knowledge to become exactly what she needed. The life insurance money had been meant for her retirement, for travel she and her first husband had planned. Now she worked part-time at 70 to make ends meet. Jennifer's story broke my heart. Her ex-husband had been abusive, and Marcus had seemed like salvation. Gentle with her kids, respectful of boundaries, offering the stable family life she'd dreamed of. Her son had started calling him Dad. Her daughter had asked if he could walk her down the aisle someday. The college funds had been their futures, carefully saved since birth. She'd had to take a second job, move to a smaller apartment, tell her kids that college meant loans now. Angela was the youngest, but perhaps the strongest. She'd fought back, first hired a private investigator when things didn't add up, but Marcus had already destroyed her credit by then. 23 years old with bankruptcy on her record, she'd lost job opportunities, been denied apartments, watched her dreams crumble. But she'd also been the one to first contact law enforcement, starting the investigation that eventually led to Diana finding us all. We compared notes, finding eerie patterns in his behavior. The same pet names used with each of us. Identical gifts given for similar occasions. The way he'd isolate us from friends and family who asked too many questions. How he'd gaslight us when we noticed inconsistencies, making us doubt our own perceptions. The gradual financial requests that seemed so reasonable in context. We'd all been living in variations of the same relationship, customized just enough to feel unique. Diana joined us later with updates on the case. They'd found 12 more victims across the country, women who'd been too ashamed to report their experiences or hadn't realized they were victims of a crime rather than just a bad relationship. Some had lost thousands, others, hundreds of thousands. The total theft exceeded $2 million over 12 years. Marcus had been methodical, keeping detailed records that were now evidence against him. The prosecutor, a woman named Sharon who specialized in fraud cases, explained the legal process ahead. Each of us would need to testify, relive our experiences in court. Marcus's defense would likely claim mental illness, sex addiction, anything to minimize his sentence. But with our testimonies, the documented evidence and the wire recording of his attempt to flee conviction was almost certain. The question was how many years he'd serve. We formed an unexpected support group bound by shared trauma but also shared strength. Patricia became our den mother, checking in on everyone regularly. Jennifer started a private online forum where we could talk freely about our experiences. Angela began researching a nonprofit to help romance scam victims, something that could have helped us all if it had existed. I offered my design services to help build the organization's brand, creating something positive from our collective pain. The financial recovery process was complex. The FBI's asset forfeiture team had frozen several accounts Marcus maintained under false names. Some money could be recovered, though not all. Insurance claims for fraud were possible in some cases. Patricia's homeowner's insurance covered some of her losses. My business insurance had a fraud protection clause I'd never thought I'd need. It wouldn't make any of us whole, but it was something. We attended therapy together, sometimes group sessions that helped us understand how we'd been targeted and manipulated. The therapist explained cognitive dissonance, trauma bonding, the psychology of con artists. Marcus had likely studied these same concepts using psychological principles as weapons. Understanding the mechanics of our manipulation helped reduce the shame. We weren't stupid or weak. We'd been deliberately hunted by a skilled predator who'd spent years perfecting his techniques. 6 months passed before the trial began. Those months were filled with depositions, evidence reviews, pretrial hearings. Marcus had hired an expensive attorney, though no one knew where the money came from. Probably hidden assets the FBI hadn't found yet. His strategy became clear early on. Paint himself as a man with mental illness who needed help, not punishment. Paint us as scorned women exaggerating our losses. Attack our credibility individually to weaken the case collectively. The trial itself was a marathon of emotional endurance. Sitting in the courtroom, seeing him in an orange jumpsuit, looking smaller somehow without his carefully constructed personas. He'd grown a beard, lost more weight, developed a tremor that his attorney claimed was from medication. The performance continued even here, playing a new role of troubled man deserving sympathy rather than accountability. When I took the stand, his eyes never left my face. I could feel him willing me to break to show weakness he could exploit. But I thought of Patricia working at 70, of Jennifer's kids' stolen futures, of Angela's destroyed credit, and my voice stayed steady. I detailed our marriage, the lies, the theft, the emotional manipulation. I played the wire recording of him trying to steal $50,000 more while claiming to love me. Jennifer's testimony was powerful. She brought photos of her children, explained how she'd had to tell them Uncle Mark wasn't coming back, couldn't explain why. Her daughter had asked if it was something she'd done wrong. Her son had stopped trusting male teachers, coaches, any man who showed interest in their family. The ripple effects of Marcus's crimes extended far beyond financial losses. Angela's testimony was fierce. She detailed every forged document, every fraudulent account, every destroyed opportunity. She'd brought charts showing how his actions would impact her finances for the next decade. Student loans at higher interest rates due to bad credit. Security deposits double what they should be. job offers rescinded after credit checks. She made the jury understand that his crimes weren't just about money, but about futures stolen. Patricia's testimony was the most dignified. She spoke about her late husband, the life they'd planned, the retirement that should have been comfortable. She explained how Marcus had studied her grief, weaponized her loneliness, turned her need for connection into a tool for theft. At 70, she was starting over, working retail, living with her daughter dependent when she should have been independent. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours. Guilty on all 43 counts: wire fraud, mail fraud, identity theft, bigamy conspiracy, money laundering. The judge, a woman who'd shown little emotion during the trial, seemed personally offended by Marcus's crimes. During sentencing, she spoke about the particular cruelty of romance fraud, the violation of trust at the most intimate level. She sentenced him to 25 years federal prison, no possibility of parole for 15. She also ordered full restitution, though everyone knew we'd never see most of it. Marcus's reaction was the first genuine emotion I'd seen from him. Shock, rage, disbelief cycling across his face. He'd truly believed he'd manipulate his way out of consequences, just as he always had. As they led him away, he turned to look at us, all 4 of us sitting together in the gallery. For just a moment, his mask completely dropped and we saw the void behind it. No remorse, no understanding, just cold fury at being caught. The year following Marcus's conviction became one of rebuilding and unexpected transformation. The house I'd shared with him felt haunted by false memories, so I sold it using the proceeds to pay off the debts he'd accumulated in my name. I moved into a smaller apartment downtown, one that had never heard his voice, never witnessed his lies. The space was entirely mine, decorated with my choices, my colors, my style. It felt like breathing again after years of subtle suffocation. My graphic design business, which had suffered during the chaos of the investigation and trial, slowly recovered. Clients who'd initially distanced themselves, embarrassed by association with scandal, began returning. Some were drawn by curiosity, but most genuinely wanted to support me. One client, a woman CEO who'd built her company after her own divorce, became a mentor, teaching me about financial literacy and self-protection I should have known years earlier. The relationship with my family deepened through this crisis. My parents, who'd harbored quiet doubts about Mark, they'd been too polite to voice strongly, became my anchors. Sunday dinners at their house, mundane conversations about weather and gardening felt like healing rituals. My sister Catherine, who'd always found Mark slightly off, never said "I told you so." Instead, she simply showed up, bringing wine and terrible movies, letting me cry or laugh or sit in silence as needed. My best friend Emma, who'd watched me disappear into Mark's world over the years, helped me rediscover who I'd been before him. We resumed our Thursday night drinks tradition, joined a hiking club, took the art classes I'd always postponed for his schedule. She introduced me to her therapist, a woman who specialized in trauma from intimate partner deception. Those sessions were archaeological digs through my psyche, uncovering the person I'd been before Marcus had reshaped me to fit his needs. Patricia, Jennifer, Angela, and I maintained our unexpected sisterhood. We met monthly, sometimes in person, often virtually. Patricia had moved in with her daughter, but found purpose in volunteering with elder fraud prevention programs. Jennifer had started dating again, slowly, carefully, with full disclosure to anyone serious about her past. Angela had thrown herself into advocacy work, her nonprofit for romance fraud victims gaining traction and funding. The nonprofit, which Angela named Phoenix Rising, became a shared project for all of us. I designed the website and marketing materials, creating visuals that conveyed both vulnerability and strength. Patricia wrote content about recognizing manipulation tactics, her elegant prose making difficult concepts accessible. Jennifer managed the survivor forums, creating safe spaces for victims to share without judgment. Together, we built something that would have helped us if it had existed when we needed it. Speaking engagements began 6 months after the trial. The first was terrifying, standing in front of 200 people at a women's business conference telling my story. But afterward, a dozen women approached me privately, sharing their own experiences with romance scams, financial abuse, emotional manipulation. I realized our story had power beyond our individual pain. It could educate, warn, and heal others walking similar paths. The book offer came through Angela's literary agent friend. A publisher wanted our story, the all four women's experiences told in our own voices. We spent months writing, revising, reliving trauma, but also discovering triumph. The advance was substantial, and we voted unanimously to donate half to Phoenix Rising. The other half helped each of us rebuild financially. Patricia could reduce her work hours. Jennifer started college funds again. Angela paid off her bankruptcy attorney. I invested in my business, hiring my first employee. Dating remained unthinkable for the first year. The idea of trusting someone new felt impossible when I'd so thoroughly misjudged someone I'd lived with for a decade. But slowly I began to understand that Marcus had targeted my capacity for trust, not destroyed it. In therapy, I learned to distinguish between healthy skepticism and paranoid withdrawal. Red flags I'd ignored before became visible. Boundaries I'd never established became non-negotiable. My approach to finances transformed completely. Separate accounts only. Regular credit monitoring. Background checks that went beyond surface level. Some might call it paranoid, but I called it educated. I took courses in financial planning, learned about investments Marcus had claimed were too complex for me to understand. The knowledge felt like armor protection against future predators who might see me as prey. The first time someone asked me out a year and a half after Marcus's arrest, I said no reflexively. The second time, a different man, a client's brother who ran a coffee shop, I considered it for a week before declining. The third time, it was David from my hiking club, someone I'd known for 6 months who'd never pushed or pressured, who knew my story because everyone did after the book was published. I said yes to coffee, just coffee in the middle of the day in public with my own transportation. David was patient in ways that felt foreign. He accepted my boundaries without question, understood when I needed to verify details of his life, wasn't offended when I ran a background check. He had his own baggage from a difficult divorce, understood that trust was earned in increments, not assumed wholesale. We moved slowly, glacially by normal standards, but at a pace that felt safe to me. Coffee became lunch, became dinner, became genuine friendship before anything else. 2 years after Marcus's conviction, Phoenix Rising had helped over 300 victims of romance fraud. Our book had become a resource recommended by therapists and law enforcement. The speaking engagements had evolved into a consulting business helping banks and dating sites recognize and prevent fraud. What had begun as victimization had transformed into expertise, pain alchemized into purpose. I testified at a congressional hearing about online fraud, sitting beside Patricia as we explained to lawmakers how predators like Marcus operated in digital spaces. Jennifer appeared via video link, her children now teenagers, sitting beside her, understanding finally why Uncle Mark had disappeared. Angela had become a nationally recognized expert on romance scams, appearing on news programs and documentaries. We'd become the experts we'd needed when we were drowning in confusion and shame. The restitution checks came sporadically, small amounts recovered from hidden accounts the FBI continued to find. Marcus had been more successful than even they'd initially realized, with cryptocurrency wallets and offshore accounts still being discovered. Each check felt like a small victory, not for the money itself, but for what it represented. Justice grinding slowly but inevitably forward. Contact from Marcus came once, a letter from federal prison that Diana forwarded to me with warnings about its content. I read it once, then burned it. It was 20 pages of manipulation alternating between proclamations of love, accusations of betrayal, and threats too vague to prosecute, but clear enough to understand. He was still performing, still trying to control narrative, even from a cell. The letter showed he'd learned nothing, understood nothing, felt nothing resembling genuine remorse. I thought about the woman I'd been when I met Marcus at that tech conference 13 years ago. 24, ambitious, trusting, eager for love and partnership. I grieved for her innocence while being grateful for who she'd become. Stronger, definitely. Wiser, certainly. More cautious, yes, but not closed. The capacity for trust and love hadn't been destroyed, just refined, made more discerning. The day I signed my divorce papers, finalizing the end of a marriage that had never really existed, I felt neither celebration nor sorrow. It was simply administrative cleanup paperwork acknowledging what had already ended. The judge, the same one who'd sentenced Marcus, recognized me, offered a small nod of acknowledgement. Another woman reclaiming her life from a predator's fiction. Standing outside the courthouse, divorce decree in hand, I thought about Marcus's note, the one that had started this entire journey. I need time to think. 5 words that had seemed devastating, but had actually been liberation. If he hadn't left, I might have spent years more living in his carefully constructed delusion. His vanishing hadn't been abandonment, but inadvertent gift, forcing me to discover the truth that would have eventually destroyed me if I'd remained ignorant. My phone buzzed with messages from Patricia, Jennifer, and Angela, checking in, offering support and celebration. We'd planned dinner that night not to commemorate the divorce, but to acknowledge another step in our collective journey. 4 women who'd been victims but refused to remain defined by victimization. 4 women who'd transformed trauma into purpose, pain into power, isolation into connection. The note he'd left was still in my desk drawer, kept not as memento, but as reminder. Reminder that sometimes the worst things that happen to us become catalysts for becoming who we're meant to be. Marcus had stolen money, time, and trust, but he'd inadvertently given me something too. The knowledge of my own strength, the discovery of sisterhood and shared struggle, the understanding that survival could become thriving with enough time, support, and determination. That evening at dinner with my fellow survivors, we toasted not to endings, but to beginnings. To the women we'd become through fire. To the women we'd continue becoming. To the future victims we'd help avoid our fate. And to the truth that while someone can steal your money, your time, and your trust, they can never steal the person you become when you fight back and reclaim your life. What would you do if you discovered your entire marriage was built on lies, that the person sleeping beside you was a complete stranger? Would you have the strength to fight back, to help other victims to rebuild from nothing? Share your thoughts below. And if this story resonated with you, please like and subscribe to hear more stories of women who refuse to let betrayal define their endings. Thank you for listening to my journey. And remember, sometimes the most devastating revelations lead to the most powerful transformations. Stay strong, trust wisely, and never forget that your truth is more powerful than anyone's deception.